Is this normal? What to expect when you're brewing. We get a lot of comments and questions like, is this normal? Should it look like this in people's brews? And we do go over all of this, but we realize it's scattered across hundreds of videos, and it's kind of hard to find sometimes. So we thought we'd make a top 10 list and go over the top 10 things that people have been asking about. Number 10, yes, it's normal to see bubbles and foam in a fermenter during fermentation. That's literally the yeast doing their job. They create CO2 and ethanol, which is the alcohol you drink, as well as a zillion other things. And as that comes out of solution, it creates foam and bubbles. You should see bubbles coming up the side, you should see bubbles in your airlock, things like that. As that foam gets up there, sometimes it dries and it forms this brown crusty line called a KREUSEN line. Notice I said sometimes, because if it doesn't, there's no harm. And if it does, there's no harm. It's all good. Number 9, yeast does not determine ABV. What I mean by that is we get this one a lot. People say, well, if I add more yeast, can I get more alcohol? No. If I double the yeast, does that mean I get double the alcohol? Well, no, that's not how it works. Your fermentables and your sugars determine your ABV. Now, there is one caveat to that. Yeast kind of sets the high water mark or the limit. There is such a thing called an alcohol tolerance, and that is a manufacturer thing. Usually you have to use Google Foo to find it because for some reason they don't put it on the packets. I'm talking to you, yeast manufacturers, put it on the packets, make life easy for all of us homebrewers. But that means basically that is the highest that yeast should be able to ferment to. Think of it more like the Pirates Code. It's a guideline. It's not an exact. If you're at 17.95 and your yeast says 18, that doesn't mean it's going to go another 0.05%. It could go another 5%. Not likely, but it could. Or it could stop before it hits the tolerance. There's a million factors at play here that influence what your yeast will actually do. So think of it more as a guide. Number 8, sometimes fermentation smells. That's right, you may get a rotten egg smell, a sour smell, sometimes it's like a sickly sweet kind of thing, all different kinds of smells. It really shouldn't be too unpleasant. Like if you retch or gag or the neighbors are complaining about the smells, that's something to be aware of. It's not necessarily a problem, but it could be something to worry about down the line. What you want to watch out for is hairy growths that are blue, black, green, weird colors, things like that. Those are probably mold or something really bad. If you see those in your brew, dump it. Life is too short, there's just no reason to make it any shorter. Normally, molds and infections like that are a result of improper sanitation. Now, that doesn't mean that you're dirty, it just means that maybe you missed a spot, or, maybe your star sand was a little too used, or you let it sit too long, or any number of things. You could have even just had the airlock fall off while it was brewing, maybe an ingredient wasn't fully cleaned. Any number of things can happen, and it's okay, it happens to the best of us. The smells, though, those are usually caused by a stressed yeast or something of the sort. Sometimes it's from a nutrient deficiency, but more often than not, it's the eggy smell especially, is because you didn't shake it up or aerate it enough in the beginning. In other words, you left some BEJEEZUS in there. Number 7 is sediment. It is normal to have sediment in the bottom of your fermenter during fermentation. It's nothing to freak out about. It's the yeast, proteins, and all kinds of other substances that fall out of suspension during fermentation. And it's really, again, nothing to worry about. You can leave your brew on the lees for a long time. That's what it's called, lees. I say lease a lot too, just because that's the word that I was told, but it's lees, apparently. Lease is how you get a house or a car. Now, if you are making a low alcohol brew, like a cider or beers that are like 5%, those you probably don't want to leave on the lees for too long, but meads and wines, we've left them for months with no detrimental effects. I see a lot of people rushing to get it off that lees or off the sediment, and that can be dangerous because now your brew is still fermenting. And unfortunately, you rush that step, which means you might rush the next step and the next step, and before you know it, boom, you made a bottle bomb. That's not something you really want to do, so don't rush it. Leave it on the lees for a while. Also, we have a video on when it's safe to rack listed in the description of this video. Number 6 is using whole fruit. Now, when you're using whole fruit, things are just a little bit different. You want to make sure you keep it wet. Okay? You do not want that fruit cap to dry out. That's how molds and other things can form, and it can just get nasty. Or worst case, it can actually form a crust, not allowing the gases to escape, and it can blow up. I've only heard of that a time or two, but it could happen. Now, to do it, if you have a bucket, it's really easy. Take the lid off and stir it up. Yes, you are potentially adding a little bit of oxygen when you do that. However, there's so much CO2 being formed during fermentation that it's not really a worry if you're careful. You're just stirring. You're not splashing it all over the place. You're just trying to stir it up a little bit. If you're in a fermenter with an airlock, just give it a swirl. It should keep it wet enough, and that way there's no risk of oxygenation. Number 5, scaling recipes. This one comes up all the time. We get a lot of people that say, hey, can you show me how to make this in 5 gallons? And my answer always is, just multiply everything by 5 except the yeast, because our recipes are designed to scale up. We do 1 gallon because it's a lot easier for me to show a 1 gallon fermenter on screen than a 5 gallon fermenter on screen. It's just too big. They're too much to try to manage and try to be able to show you all the details involved. So that's why we do 1 gallon. Plus, we just don't have a need to make 5 gallons around here. We just really don't need that much mead laying around. So we do 1 gallon batches, but that doesn't mean that you have to do 1 gallon batches. You can do 3, you can do 5, 6, whatever you have. All you do is multiply every ingredient in that recipe by that number. Yes, even cups of tea and tea bags. If you're doing a 1 gallon and we call for 1 cup of tea with 1 tea bag, and you want to make a 3 gallon from that, you need 3 cups of tea and 3 tea bags. Yes, it really does scale that way. The only thing different is the yeast. Now, I generally use a whole packet of yeast in most brews. Sometimes I'll use half in a 1 gallon. When you scale up, there's really no need to use more yeast, okay? I just use the whole packet because A, it's easier, B, I'm just getting the most bang for my buck, and I don't have to worry about yeast going dead in the fridge. But if you really want to, you can use 2 packets in a 5 or 6 gallon batch, and there's no harm. People ask all the time, how much yeast is too much? And the first thing I want to say back is, why are you adding so much? Because you don't need to. You only need enough to get it going, and they will build a colony. That teaspoon or 2 teaspoons of yeast that you put in, well, they're going to multiply millions of times. So you're going to get a lot more yeast in the end. The amount you put in is just to get it going and enough to make a viable colony. That's it. So a packet, 2 packets at most if you're making 5 or 6 gallons, and you're fine. Like I said, everything else, just scale it up. Another word about recipes is, if you are new at this, don't try reinventing the wheel right off the bat. Use some recipes from a source you trust and make those. Keep it simple in the beginning so you can understand the fundamentals of what works and why. And that way, your next time around, you can start experimenting. But for your first time, use a recipe and do it as true to that recipe as you can. Use the same yeast, use the same ingredients, the same size, everything they did. Because if you start mixing and matching from different sources, you might be mixing methodologies as well. And without an understanding of why they did that or why they used this, when you mix them together, you might get unexpected results. Might be good, might be really bad. Number 4, time is your friend. This is one of the things that is really hard to learn as a homebrewer. Time is a necessary ingredient in your brew. You cannot rush this. I know a lot of online recipes say, oh, rack this after 2 weeks of fermentation. I disagree. You rack it when it's done. In most cases, that's going to be longer than 2 weeks, especially if you follow the kind of methodology like we do, where you take a reading and you wait a week, take another reading to make sure it's done. That means you would have been taking the first reading while it was still fermenting. There's no way it's done. Trust me on this. Yeast can't read. They have no idea that it's supposed to be ready in 2 weeks, or that you have a deadline, or you have a holiday that you're making this for, and quite frankly, they don't care. Yeast do 2 things. They eat and they breed. That's pretty much it. So they don't really care that you need a mead for your mom's birthday in 2 months. That doesn't really matter to them. They're going to do what they do. Let them have the time. If you do need a mead for a specific date, make sure you start with plenty of time ahead. Meaning almost a year or even more than a year, just to be on the safe side. What if you messed up and you had to start over again? This all goes along with number 7, but the truth is, if you rush it, you will regret it. The other part to this is a question we get a lot. What should I make if I need something to be ready in a week or two? Now, here's my answer. I say, go to the store and buy something, because there's no brew out there that should be ready and fully drinkable in just a week or two. Now, I know some beers and some ciders, maybe that's borderline, but even then, to be fully done, bottled, settled, the whole thing in 2 weeks, that's a tall order. 1 week, never mind. I've had people ask about 3 and 4 day brews. If that's what you're after, maybe homebrewing is the wrong thing to be looking at. You really are looking at a long-term game here. Minimum a month before you have anything really drinkable, okay? Number 3, more alcohol does not always make it better. If all you want to do is get drunk, there are far easier ways to do that than by making homebrew. Okay, you can just go buy a commercial product, you know, whiskey, vodka, all these things. You're gonna get drunk a whole lot faster and it won't matter. However, that said, if you like making high ABV homebrew, by all means, go for it. I'm not gonna get in your way and I'm not gonna tell you you're doing it wrong, because you know why? It's your homebrew, do it the way you want. Don't let anybody tell you different. As long as you like it, enjoy it, and nobody's getting hurt. However, for me and for Derica and for a lot of our viewers, we have found that 10 to 14, even stretching it to 15% seems to be that sweet spot. And what I mean by that is not just for flavor and enjoyment, but actually for the fermentation itself. They tend to ferment cleaner, they tend to be a more healthy fermentation, and it's more predictable. We really don't get stalls and things like that anymore. So it's just a better experience overall, and it's more reproducible. So for us trying to teach people how to do a certain recipe on camera, we can teach you how to reproduce that recipe almost to a T when we work with lower ABVs like that. The higher the ABV, the longer you need to age, the more powerful yeast you need. A lot of things start to change and it just gets a little bit more difficult. And like I always say, if you want more alcohol, have 2 glasses. Number 2, environment will change everything. Now, this is important to understand, and it's not something that we talk about a lot on the channel, but we work in our environment, which is generally 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Pretty much year-round, that's what the temperature in our house is going to be. And I say that because we don't ferment outside, we don't store outside. Everything is done in the house, okay, between 2 or 3 rooms, and they're all pretty much constant temperature. And that's important because every yeast has a range of temperatures that it likes to work in. If you are in a cold climate and you like to keep your house, say, in the 50s or 60 degree Fahrenheit range, talking to you, Adam, you're gonna have a very different experience brewing than somebody that lives, say, in the tropics and doesn't use air conditioning. Very, very different things. Different yeasts, different processes, and if you made the exact same recipe, the exact same ingredients, the exact same yeast, you will get 2 completely different products simply because the yeast will react differently. There's no one way for me to tell you. This is not a one-size-fits-all situation. It's more of a experiment. Use different yeasts and different methods until you find a method that works in your environment and stick to it. You can always modify recipes to fit. A lot of our newer recipes go dry, so you can use a higher tolerance yeast if that's what works in your area. That way you're not worrying about trying to hit that exact alcohol tolerance and keep some sweetness. We back sweeten when we need to. Not really a problem. It's all good. Number 1, if you waited till fermentation was complete, you racked it properly, you let it clear, and you bottled it properly, and you used proper sanitation the whole way through, you can store your brews at room temperature. That's right, no refrigeration necessary. It's also a misconception that refrigeration will kill yeast. Actually, it doesn't at all. It puts them dormant. Now, dormant doesn't mean dead. It actually slows them down, sometimes to a point where they may not be functioning, but in most cases, nature will find a way and those bottles still could explode. Trust me, I've seen it. One of our mods, Paul, has shown a video of, well, somebody's fridge that had exploding bottles in it because fermentation wasn't complete and they thought that cold would stop fermentation. It doesn't. It just buys you some time. So do yourself a favor, let it finish, do it right, and store them well. You'll never have a problem. Long and short, we do store all of our bottles at about 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? We don't have a cellar or anything like that where we keep them cooler. They're all stored at that temperature, and in all of my years of brewing, I've never had one bottle bomb. That's right, I'm knocking on wood. It's not a fun thing. I've seen pictures, but I've never actually experienced it myself. We've also never had a bottle spoil. We use screw caps, swing tops, corks, all kinds of caps. We've never had one spoil. The only thing that I do recommend is once you open it and drink some, now you've got an excess air gap in there. If you let that sit for too long, first, over time, it's going to oxidize a little bit and cause off flavors. That we've had. We've never had one spoil, but we've had the off flavor thing. People always ask, how long? Well, that depends on your personal tastes. I've let them sit at room temperature for a few days. Couldn't really detect much difference at all. I'm sure if I did a side by side, I might get something, but really nothing bad. After several weeks, you could start to detect it. We had a couple, too, as a matter of fact, that they got not good anymore. They sat half a bottle or less for about a year on the shelf before we just ended up saying, let's just finish these off. They just really weren't any good anymore, but it wasn't like they'd spoiled. Just the flavor had changed so much from oxidation, kind of like what happens with sherry. Not a problem, nothing wrong with it. It just didn't taste the same anymore. It didn't taste nearly as good as it did when it was younger, that's for sure. Have a question or a situation that I didn't cover? Ask away in the comments. We're gonna try to get to everybody and see if we can help you out. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.